going to do his presentation. But the first part was supposed to be done by another student, but he withdrew. So I'm going to cover his part, and then you can start your part of physiology. So the first part we need to cover the anatomy part, right? So before going into how things work, first let's review what organs there are in the respiratory system. Okay. So first of all, what do we need the respiratory system for? This is very basic and simple. I have been mentioning this many times. The gas exchange between the oxygen and carbon dioxide is going to take place in this system between the blood and the external environment. Okay, and by external we mean it's inside our body, but it's considered external because it's connected to the environment, okay, to the air. The exchange of these gases will take place within the lungs in a part called alveoli. Okay, and this is the only place where this exchange takes place. Okay, so even though the air is going to travel from the nose and all the pathways to the lungs, ultimately to the alveoli, this is only conductive. Okay, it's going just to travel, but the exchange, the actual exchange, is going to take place here in the alveoli. So the pathways to the lungs will purify, will warm, and humidify the incoming air. Okay, and this is important. You may feel sometimes when you are feeling sick, for example, and you have very dry your pathways, it's really bothering. You can feel the air is not really warming up, and it's painful. So it has also a purpose. It's not just to transport the air from the outside to your alveoli, okay? And we have previously studied also in the cardiovascular system how the heart will pump and make the blood circulate, right? Oxygenated blood that ultimately is going to be needed in the cells. So the respiratory system also shares this responsibility with the cardiovascular system. Okay. And there are some organs involved that have some roles in the respiratory system. We know many of them. The only organ that is visible from the respiratory system is our nose, right? We can see our nose. But it's not only the nose, we have then the pharynx, the larynx, trachea, the bronchi, and all the smaller branches branching out from the bronchi, and then the lungs, okay? Within the lungs, we have this very small, very tiny structure called the alveoli, okay? Where we mentioned takes place the exchange of gases, okay? So we have here the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchitis, the lungs, and the alveoli. And the nose, we have, you know how it's called this part? The nostrils, okay? We can move actually these sides of our nose. The nostrils, and in the inside, we have the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity will be divided by a septum. Okay, we'll divide this side, left and right. Here you have the nasal cavity, the nostrils on the outer part. You already might imagine we have some receptors that will help us smell, okay, distinguish one smell from another, the olfactory receptors. These are in the mucosa, in the superior part of the nasal cavity. Okay, so here we have the receptors. And the rest of the cavity is covered, is lined with respiratory mucosa. Okay, and this mucosa rest is in the base of a very rich network of veins, very thin wall veins, that are in charge of warming the air. Okay. And actually this is why it's a very common sign of bleeding. if you receive a punch in your nose, then you start bleeding profusely because it's very rich network of capillaries. And the mucus is also produced by some glands in this mucosa that will moisten the air, will make the air more humid, more moist, and will trap also some foreign particles, some bacteria. If you notice many times if you are in an environment that is very air polluted and then you blow your nose, you can notice sometimes it's very dark, right? Like black particles coming out from your nose. It's because they are trapped in these mucus. Okay? The purpose is for these foreign particles not to go into your lungs. Okay? So it will protect you. And we have mentioned also there are some ciliated cells covering the mucosa, the nasal mucosa. And what is the purpose of these ciliated cells? To move this mucus towards the pharynx. Okay? So we're moving some particles towards the pharynx. And from the pharynx, where do you think it will go? If this is supposed to protect us, right? We don't want this to go into our lungs.
Stomach.
Yes, actually we will eat it. Okay, and it will be disposed with the stomach enzymes. Okay. Remember, all this is connected. Okay. The lateral walls have some projections called conchi. Okay. We have the superior, the middle, and the inferior conchi. And what do you think would be the purpose of having these projections within the nasal cavity? This is actually to increase the surface. Okay, remember, if you have a surface like this, it's not the same as if you start having some projections. It will increase the surface so that you have more surface that you can warm up the air or can moist the air. And it also increases the air turbulence. Okay, so making the air to have more contact with the mucosa. And it's separated from the oral cavity or your mouth very much by the palate. Okay, if you feel the upper part of your mouth, you can feel there is in the front part, in the anterior, it's hard because you have bone there. So that's called hard palate, okay, made out of bone. But the posterior part is actually soft and is made of muscle. Okay. So the oral cavity is separated by this palate, the hard and the soft palate. Okay. See here from the drawing. This is the muscle when we made the soft palate, and here is the bony part, which is the hard palate. And this is separating the nasal cavity from the oral cavity. Okay, this big muscle here is the tongue. Okay, so the air will be flowing from here. You inhale the air, comes through your nose, and it will continue moving through the pharynx. And actually, have you noticed that when you are in a cold environment or the air is cold, you start having like a runny nose? Suddenly, maybe you will have some mucus running out from your nose. It's because the cilia becomes very sluggish, very slow to move. So instead of helping the mucus going the other way, it will start going outside. The mucus accumulates and starts dripping outward. Okay. And we've studied this from the skeletal system. You know, within the bones there are some cavities that are surrounding the nasal cavity. You can find these in the frontal bone, the sphenoid, the ethmoid, and the maxillary bones. These are called the paranasal sinuses. We studied this from the skeletal system. The purpose is to lighten up the skull, but they also act as resonance for speech. So they're involved in speech. But these hollow spaces within the bone, they are covered also with mucosa, and this mucosa produce mucus, and these mucus will drain into the nasal cavity. Okay, it could be very painful if the mucosa in the paranasal sinus gets inflamed or some bacteria comes in there, and if you start producing pus there. So we have moved from then the nasal cavity. The air will continue flowing through the pharynx, actually commonly called the throat. This is a muscular passage connecting the nasal cavity to the larynx. Okay, so it's a continue. And you can divide the pharynx into 3 areas. The nasal pharynx, which is closer to the nasal cavity, nasal pharynx, oropharynx, closer to the oral cavity in the middle, and the laryngopharynx, which is the inferior region, which is the continuum with the larynx. Okay, and something particular here is that the oropharynx, the middle region, and the lower region, the laryngopharynx, they are also common to the oral cavity. So when we inhale or when we eat, they pass through this area, the oral and the larynx. But we need the air to go one way and the food to go the other way, right? Have you ever noticed many times if you are, for example, having a sore throat, that you may also have ear pain? So it's not uncommon to have these. Why? Because there are some tubes from the middle ear connecting to your pharynx. Okay, the pharyngotympanic tubes or auditory tubes will drain the middle ear into the nasal pharynx. So there is this connection. So if you are having, for example, a sore throat or an infection in the throat, it's not uncommon that you will feel pain in your ear or that it will also move up into your middle ear. Okay, and that the infection will go to your ear. We have previously studied also lymphatic tissues. There are some clusters of lymphatic tissues called tonsils. And we have different types of tonsils. I think you mentioned them, right, before. We have the pharyngeal tonsils, also called adenoids, in the nasopharynx, the palatine tonsils in the oropharynx, and some at the base of the tongue. If you watch or try to watch the base of your tongue in the very, very it's not the lower, but the posterior part of your tongue, you can find some irregular structures. So you can actually see some of these lingual tonsils. And they are part of the lymphatic tissue, so they will be involved in protection and defense. So the next part, the air is moving from the nasal cavity, the pharynx, and now it's moving to the larynx. The larynx is where the voice is going to be produced. It's called also the voice box. It's routes for air and food into proper channels. So here, food or air will go there appropriate ways. Okay. We're going to have here the air going in nasal pharynx. If it goes this way, it will go to the stomach. So actually you can eat air, right? It's not desirable, otherwise you will start having gases. But air can go this way. But usually it goes this way to the trachea, into your lungs. But in some situations, especially if you're unconscious and you vomit, for example, it's possible that you inhale, that you aspire what you're vomiting. Which can end up in inflammation of your lungs because of this connection. Okay. The larynx plays a role in speech, and it's made of egg-bridging cartilage. And a spoon-shaped flap is like cartilage, but it's like a flap, this epiglottis. Okay, and this is the one who will be in charge of closing the connections here, so that air can move to the other way, or the food moves into your esophagus. How does the larynx look like? It's made of cartilage, called the thyroid cartilage, which is the largest hyaline cartilage, this one here, the thyroid cartilage. You also have the epiglottis, I mentioned here. It's like a flap, and it's in the superior part of the larynx. And it will channel the food or the air. And then you have also here the vocal cords. They will produce your voice, particular voice. And you also have the glottis, which is the opening between the vocal cords. If we continue now, here was the larynx. The air continues its passages. We will continue to the trachea. Okay. The trachea connects the larynx with the bronchi. Okay. It's lined with ciliated mucosa, and the beats continuously in the opposite direction of incoming air. So if the air is coming this way, it will beat the cilia in the opposite direction. It will expel the mucus loaded with, again, foreign substances like dust or bacteria or other debris away from the lungs. You don't want these foreign substances to go into your lungs. Otherwise, it can be a source of infection. Okay? So you have here the continuation, you have your trachea, and then it will branch up into the bronchi, the main bronchi. Main or primary bronchi, it's the division of the trachea. Okay. Each division, each side, right and left, it will go into the lung. But one important characteristic here is that the right bronchi is different from the left bronchi. The right bronchi is wider, is shorter, and it's straighter than the left one. Okay. And why is this important to know? Because in case you inhale a foreign object, for example, it's more probable, it's more likely that it will get stuck in the right bronchi. Okay. And then the bronchi will subdivide into smaller and smaller branches. And then we have the lungs. Finally, the lungs. So you see the respiratory system is composed of more organs than just the lungs, right? The lungs will occupy most of the thoracic cavity. The apex, the upper part, is near the clavicle, this bone here. And the base rests on the diaphragm, which is a muscle here, okay, in the inferior portion. And each lung is divided into different lobes. It's not our purpose to know all the lobes and each of the segments of the lobes, okay? But just so you know, the left lung has only 2 lobes, and the right one has 3.
Yes.
Right bronchi is wider and straighter,
Yes.
and foreign substances can be stuck right. So, what is important in these things?
What do you mean?
Why?
Why the difference?
Yeah.
Because one side has 3 lobes, and the other one only has 2. But the size of both lungs is pretty much the same. So when they divide, they branch, one of the lungs will be straighter than the other one, because then it has to divide in 3. and the right one only in 2. And then if you have something stuck, let's say like a small ball or bean or something, it's more common that it will go to the right than the left. And if it goes to the right, also all that segments will be affected. We don't need to know all the segments of each side. Just as a reference, once the bronchi starts dividing into smaller and smaller branches, okay? And each of these branches will serve different parts of the lung, okay? So the portion of the lung will be supplied by primary branch and the lower bronchus. You remember when we studied the heart that there were coverings in the heart? Same is true for lungs. Okay, we also have here visceral pleural and parietal pleural. The visceral pleural will cover the lung surface, and the parietal pleural will cover the walls of the thoracic cavity. And again, these two membranes have some liquid within them, but it's very, very thin. And what would be the purpose of having these two membranes here? Why do we have these two membranes covering the lungs?
For protecting lung.
Protecting is one, yes. But remember, when you inhale and you exhale, your lungs will expand, right? So similar to the heart, that when it's pumping, it has to extend and distend, extend and distend. And this will make smoother the surface, right? And it's also covered by a very, very thin layer of fluid. This is called the pleural fluid. Many diseases or abnormalities or problems can lie also from here, okay? Not mention. This is the division of the branches, sometimes called the respiratory tree, the division of them. We mentioned the main or the primary bronchi going to the right and the left. From there it goes to the secondary, the tertiary bronchi, the smaller ones, the bronchioli. And the last one, the very end ones, are the terminal bronchioles. Okay? So imagine like a big tree branching out to smaller and smaller and smaller branches. And the end ones, at the end, they will have the alveoli. Okay? And here is where the gas exchange will take place. Okay? So all that the smallest branches have reinforcing cartilage in their walls. Why would be these? This is connected to the next part about the respiratory zone and the membrane. We mentioned the alveoli is the only part where the gas exchange will take place. So after here, we are only moving air from the outside to the alveoli. But this part is called respiratory zone, and it includes the bronchioli, the terminal parts of the branching, the alveolar ducts, the alveolar sacs, and the alveoli. So the alveoli is the unit, the smallest part. All of them, it's like having grapes, a lot of grapes hanging from a branch. So you have the alveolar sac with the alveolar ducts here. And the interesting part here is, again, that this is smaller areas of the alveoli. They are composed largely of a single and thin squamous epithelial cell. So this is a very thin layer, so that it facilitates the exchange of gases. If you have muscle, cartilage, and other structures, then it would be very difficult for gas to go from one way to the other, right? And there's also some surfactant or a lipid substance, a fatty substance, that will prevent these walls from collapsing. Okay, we want them to be expanded so that you increase the area of exchange between CO2 and oxygen. But what will happen if, for example, I'm having a cold or some portion of this bronchially is obstructed with mucus? Then that area will not receive air, right? So for that, we have some pores, some openings connecting neighboring air sacs. So it's very clever. There are these pores connecting neighboring air sacs, and these pores will provide alternative routes. Okay, so if you have a plug of mucus somewhere that is stopping the flow of air, then you have the pores that will allow air to flow and to reach these alveoli. So I mentioned it's a very, very thin wall. Probably you, Suzuki-san will most definitely have to talk about this, right? The respiratory membrane. There, if you think this is the alveoli, imagine this is like a space, okay, like a half wall here, and you have the pores connecting one alveoli with another one. Together, these alveolar and the capillary walls, there is a very rich network of capillaries serving these alveoli. The membranes where they are resting, they may be fused, they may be connected, and it may have some elastic fibers also, but this is called the respiratory membrane. Okay, it's a very thin structure here that will allow the pass or the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So gas exchange takes place here in the respiratory membrane, and it's by diffusion. Okay, the oxygen will enter the blood from the air that is in the alveoli. The carbon dioxide will move from the blood to the alveoli. But there are some other cells also, not only the cells making up the alveoli. There are some alveolar macrophages that will provide also protection for the respiratory system. And we have some other cells that will produce the surfactant or the lipid substance that will prevent the alveoli from collapsing. Okay, so is everything clear up to here? Then, if it's all right, then Mr. Suzuki will talk in the next part about the respiratory physiology. Okay, I included also in the handouts something about respiratory physiology, mainly just to make sure that you have additional information. Perhaps I'm not sure if he will cover, okay? But you can start. You have 30 minutes. Speak slowly. Okay, take your time. Okay, and you can start whenever you want.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Did you have a respiratory physiology? I have a sore throat.
Oh.
I had a. I will explain four contents. First, mechanics of breathing. Second, respiratory volumes and capacities. Third, external and internal respiration, and last, gas transport in the blood. First, I'll explain mechanics of breathing. Breathing consists of two phases, inspiration and expiration. Inspiration is okay. During inspiration, the diaphragm in Japanese okakumaku and the intercostal muscles contract. The diaphragm moves downward, increasing the volume of chest cavity, and the intercostal muscles pull the ribs, rokotsu, up, extending the rib cage and further increasing this volume. Increasing this volume and the air pressure in alveoli is too below and too below. Air always flows place of high pressure to a place of lower pressure, so it rushes. The air rushes in through the respiratory tract and into the alveoli. Conversely, during expiration, diaphragm and intercostal muscles relax. This returns the chest cavity to its original volume, so the air flows out. Second, I will explain respiratory volumes and capacities. Respiratory volumes can be divided into 4 units. First, tidal volume is the amount of air that is inspired and expired during the normal breath. Second, expiratory reserve volume is the additional amount of air that can be expired after a normal expiration. Expiratory reserve volume is the additional amount of air that can be inspired after a normal inspiration. Visual volume is the amount of air that is left after expiratory reserve volume is expired. It cannot be measured. This is the relationships of these 4 units. This is normal breathing, and this is next, I will introduce respiratory capacities. Respiratory capacity are measurements of 2 or more volumes. Respiratory capacity also can be divided into 4 units. Vital capacity, inspiratory capacity, functional visual capacity, and total lung capacity. The vital capacity measures the maximum amount of air that can be inspired or expired during the respiratory cycle. It is the sum of the expiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and the inspiratory reserve volume. The inspiratory capacity is the amount of air that can be inspired after the end of a normal expiration. It is the sum of tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume. The functional visual capacity measures the amount of additional air that can be expired after a normal expiration. It is sum of the expiratory reserve volume and the residual volume. The total lung capacity is a measurement of the total amount of air that the lung can hold. The total lung capacity is the sum of the residual volume, expiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and inspiratory reserve volume. This is the relationship of respiratory volume and capacities. Third, I will explain the differences between external respiration and internal respiration. External respiration is the transfer of gas between respiratory organs and the outer environment. Internal respiration is the transfer of gas between the blood and cells. External respiration involves two stages, ventilation and gas exchange. Ventilation is the movement of the air in and out of the lungs. Gas exchange, oxygen and carbon dioxide take place in the alveoli of the lung. Oxygen is taken in, but carbon dioxide is released. During internal respiration, oxygen is released to tissue or living cells, and carbon dioxide is absorbed by the blood. After that, oxygen is used for producing energy in the cell. Finally, I explain gas transport in the blood. Most of the oxygen from alveoli is transported by hemoglobin molecule in red blood cells in the form of hemoglobin dioxide. About 70% of carbon dioxide from tissue is transported in the form of bicarbonate ion. About 20 of the carbon dioxide is transported in the form of this compound. The rest of carbon dioxide is transported as it is in plasma. In other words, it dissolves in plasma. Here, a question arises: how is oxygen released from hemoglobin? How is released? To answer this question, I explain the characteristics of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin has the trait that the less oxygen exists, the more hemoglobin releases oxygen, and the more carbon dioxide exists, the stronger this tendency is. Less oxygen and more carbon dioxide exists in tissue than in alveoli. So, in tissue, oxygen transported from alveoli is released by hemoglobin. Do you understand? This is my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for him?
Yes. The term in Japanese, 肺活量, literally lung activity quantity. I had asthma, and I often checked in hospitals.
Spirometer? With
Probably
machines.
yes. In Wikipedia, 肺活量 means 肺活量 is written in vital capacity vital capacity. Yes. Oh.
This zone is cannot be measured.
Oh.
So you can measure this.
Okay.
Hyperthyroid.
Vital capacity. Okay. Thank you.
With the Japanese terms, I cannot help you. Any more comments, questions for him? No? Okay, thank you very much. Good job. So I gave you also the printouts of his presentation. Just to make sure about a few things I wanted to include in the handouts that I gave you. The process is the same, obviously. Okay. For educational purposes, we can distinguish different parts of the process, or we can group them in some ways. So I just wanted to make sure to give you the information. So I put extra slides on here. He already mentioned many of these things. 4 distinct processes: the pulmonary ventilation, just the moving of the air in and out of the lungs, basically the breathing. He mentioned the external respiration, the exchange between the blood, the pulmonary blood, and the alveoli, or the exterior. Okay. The respiratory gas transport. This is the transport of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide between the lungs and the tissues. Okay, so they are circulating through the bloodstream. And the internal respiration, or the gas exchange between the blood and the cells inside the body. And although only maybe the first 2 processes are responsibility of the respiratory system, we need all 4 of them to be able to survive. Okay, so all of them are connected. If we go little by little, let's just review some of what he already mentioned. The ventilation, the breathing, okay, it's completely mechanical. It depends on the volume changes in the thoracic cavity. Breathing, or this ventilation, consists of these 2 phases he mentioned: inspiration and expiration. Okay. You can read some of the definitions. He also mentioned about these, how the inspiration will take place. The diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles will contract. So the thoracic cavity will increase. Okay. The diaphragm contracts, it moves down, flattens out, height of the thoracic cavity will increase. Okay, the diaphragm is like this, and then you inspire, it flattens, then you have more area. The external intercostal muscles, the muscles that are between the ribs here, when they contract, they will lift the rib cage, all these ribs. Pushing your sternum, remember this is the sternum. If you inspire, you will move it forward, increasing the anteroposterior dimension. The lungs are stretched to a larger size. You are inhaling, you're taking oxygen in. The intrapulmonary volume it will increase. The gases within the lung will spread out to fill more space. The intrapulmonary pressure will drop. This will suck air into your lungs, and the air flows into the lungs until the intrapulmonary pressure will equal the external atmospheric pressure. You cannot retain the air forever, so you have to exhale. And this is a passive process. Okay, The relaxation of these muscles will allow for air to go out. This will descend the rib cage, and the lungs will recoil or contract again, will go to their original size and position. What happens where for some reason, we mentioned there are these two membranes covering our lungs, right? With their very thin fluid between these two membranes. What happens when, for some reason, either you receive a knife or injury or there's an inflammation or something, but it's possible that air comes between these two membranes. Okay, and this is called pneumothorax. Pneumo from air, thorax from the thorax. Pneumothorax is when air enters this space between the two pleurals. Okay, this happens when you receive an injury to the chest wall, or if there is a rupture of the pleural. If this is the normal state, you have here your lung, but for some reason air comes inside, then your lung will be contracted. Okay, it's very painful, and obviously you will not be able to breathe. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And because this, you have your rib cage here, and you have air coming inside, it's a limited space, so it's pushing your lung. So your lung will collapse. This is a situation called atelectasis. Okay, and it will collapse from the site of the injury. Okay, so if you receive a knife wound in your right part, your right lung will be collapsed. It could be lethal, of course. He already mentioned all of these, the respiratory volumes and the capacities. You can see here more or less in average how much in an adult male or female each of them represent, and a description of them. The same figure that he mentioned. And how can we measure these different volumes? Have you ever seen a machine like this one? You go to the doctor, you put like a small tube in your mouth, and the doctor starts yelling at you, breathe, 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 or exhale, 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 more. Right? This is a spirometer. So basically, clip your nose, and it will measure the air that goes in and out to measure your lung capacity. Okay, this will give an idea of if you're having any problems or respiratory problems. So consists of a hollow bell inverted over water, it will measure the capacities. And it's useful to evaluate losses in your function, your respiratory functions, okay? And following the course of respiratory diseases. Okay, there are other situations other than breathing that will move air into and outside of your lungs and will modify the respiratory rhythm. Most are reflex actions. When you cough, when you sneeze, when you cry, when you laugh, if you have hiccups. You know what is hiccup? How about the Japanese students? Do you know hiccup?
No.
No?
Hiccup.
Yes.
Ah.
That is hiccups. Okay? Involuntary. Right? What is yawn? Yes. So many students yawn during class. This is yawn. Okay. You've seen the doctors auscultating you with the stethoscope. They're checking for the sounds. Okay. So there are some respiratory sounds. There are two recognizable sounds. So when the air passes through your bronchi, it can make some different sounds. If you are having, for example, an infection and there's a lot of mucus contained in different parts of your lung, then the air may not flow properly. Or if the bronchi is constricted, then the air also will do different sounds when they pass through. Okay, so the different types of sounds will guide the doctor to think about different options for diagnosis and treatment. They have different names. Some abnormal sound will sound like crackle or wheezing if it's very constricted, rails, and so on. All of them gives the doctor or the clinician an idea if there is mucus or if the bronchi is constricted and so on. You know what is wheezing?
Wheezing.
Have you ever seen like if it's a tube and you blow the tube, it's like a whistling sound. Very small sound. This is wheezing. This is called wheezing. It's from the contraction of the bronchi. Okay. So if you're having an asthma attack, yes, probably you start wheezing. And if it's very severe, you can hear it even without the stethoscope.
Yes.
So the other process, the external respiration, the exchange, already mentioned. The movement will occur from, and he already mentioned these, I'm just highlighting what he mentioned, will move towards the area of lower concentration of the diffusing substance, okay? So all gas exchanges will have to follow also loss of diffusion. He mentioned these two, the external respiration, the oxygen, the body cells will continually remove oxygen from the blood to survive. There is always more oxygen in the alveoli than in the blood, obviously. And the oxygen will tend to move from the air of the alveoli through the respiratory membrane into the pulmonary capillaries. This is the movement they will do. But the carbon dioxide, the concentration is in the pulmonary capillaries. Remember, from the cardiovascular system, we have less saturated blood going to the lungs, right? Because we need to oxygenate the blood. Here they reach the alveolar air and it will be removed from the blood into the alveoli. So it will be flushed away, will flush out from the lungs during the expiration. The transport, he also mentioned about the transport. The oxygen is transported two ways. It could be dissolved in the plasma or it could be attached to the hemoglobin molecules. This is in the red blood cells, remember, from the previous classes. So you can watch carefully the figure here to see how it transforms from CO2 to bicarbonate. Carbon dioxide, transport in three forms, also dissolved in plasma, could be bound to the hemoglobin, and it can also be in the form of bicarbonate ions, okay, transported as bicarbonate. The internal respiration, so carbon dioxide will diffuse out from the cells into the blood. We need to get rid of carbon dioxide. It will combine with water to form carbonic acid, which quickly will release bicarbonate ions. The conversion of these mostly will happen inside the red blood cells, and then it will diffuse into the plasma. Oxygen was mentioned already, was released from hemoglobin and will be quickly diffused out of the blood to enter the tissue cells. These are just some abnormalities that may happen through the transport of gas. if there is inadequate delivery of oxygen into the tissues, no matter what the cause is, we call hypoxia. Okay. When you may see sometimes your skin going bluish, you know that in that area there is less oxygenated blood. The skin and the mucus can take this bluish color, and in very light skin people, it can be more noticeable, more obvious. Other abnormalities from carbon monoxide poisoning, because carbon monoxide is odorless, so it has no odor, has no smell, you cannot smell it, has no color, and the monoxide will compete with oxygen, okay, for the same site to bind the hemoglobin. It does not produce characteristic signs of hypoxia like cyanosis or respiratory distress. But because it competes with oxygen, so instead of having these binding sites of oxygen, you will have carbon monoxide. The person will start to be confused, may have some headache. Ultimately, they can die from poisoning. Just a few things to mention about control of respiration. We have neural regulation, neural centers that are mainly in the medulla and pons. You have to review this from your nervous system. Okay, respiratory muscle will be regulated by phrenic and intercostal nerves, some nerves. The normal respiratory rate is around 12 to 15 breathing in normal state per minute. Hypernia is the increase in the rate of respiration due to extra oxygen needs. So if I need more oxygen, I start hyperventilating. Some non-neural factors, some factors not related to the neural system will be physical factors. If I start talking, then I need more oxygen. If I start coughing or exercising, or if I have fever or increasing my body temperature. And obviously volition. What is volition? This is voluntary control by my decision. Okay, I can decide to breathe faster. So this is volition. Emotional factors. If suddenly I'm starting to feel under distress or nervous. And of course, some chemical factors too, the levels of carbon monoxide and oxygen in the blood will regulate also the respiration. We mentioned the chemical factors. The carbon dioxide levels in the blood are the main regulatory chemical factors for respiration. Okay. Changes in the level of carbon dioxide will directly affect the centers, the respiratory centers in the nervous system. We will see how this increase in carbon dioxide will increase the carbonic acid. This in turn decreases the level of pH in blood and increase the respiration. Oxygen in turn, changes in the oxygen in blood will be detected by some receptors in the aorta and the carotid artery, and this information is sent to the respiratory centers in the nervous system. This is a summary of the control. Okay, if I have an increase in carbon dioxide, the pH in my blood will increase. Then I start hyperventilating, breathing faster, deeper, to diffuse the carbon monoxide, the carbon dioxide. Okay, trying to again bring back the pH to normal levels. Okay, remember about homeostasis from the very first class. Okay, And the opposite happens if the level of carbon dioxide is low. So remember the hemostasis process, one of the very, very first classes. So if carbon dioxide increases in blood, this is a stimuli. The stimuli will go to the headquarters, meaning the controls, the breathing controls in the medulla and the pons in the nervous system. Okay, so these information or sensors sensing the levels of oxygen, okay, we mentioned in the aortic body, for example, or CO2, these two levels will act as stimuli. They will go through afferent pathways to the control centers in the nervous system. Here will be decide what has to happen, and reaction goes through the afferent pathways, meaning these nerves serving the muscles, contracting, and therefore increasing or decreasing respiration. Okay? So always try to think the very first line about hemostasis and how the body tries to maintain everything within normal ranges. Okay? Okay, so maybe we can move very quickly on the last part and we can finish early. There are some disorders from the respiratory system. One of the most disabling disorder is called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. This is a group of diseases actually, called also COPD, and it's a major cause of death and disability in the United States. Conditions that may lead to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease could be chronic bronchitis or emphysema. Okay. Some characteristics of these diseases, patients almost always has a history of smoking. Okay. Dyspnea or difficulty breathing. The patient or the person will become progressively more and more severely the condition. And then even without doing too much physical exercise or activity, they may still feel this air hunger, they call it, because they lack air, so they need to still breathe. Even if they take only 2-3 steps, it would be for them like running a marathon, already out of air. Coughing and frequent pulmonary infections are common in these conditions. Most victims will keep carbon dioxide. They will be hypoxic and have alterations in the pH levels of their blood. Ultimately, they can develop respiratory failure. Okay. In chronic bronchitis, the mucosa of the lower respiratory passages will be very inflamed. There is an excessive production of mucus, and these will impair ventilation and exchange of gases. The risk of lung infections will increase. Pneumonia is very common. Hypoxia and cyanosis occurs very early in the very early stages of chronic bronchitis. In this condition called emphysema, actually the alveoli will be enlarged because the separation between one alveoli and the other one may be destroyed. So instead, for example, having two alveoli, now you have a big space, okay? But this will decrease also the area that can have gas exchange. This is a chronic inflammation that will promote lung fibrosis, or your lung will become less elastic, okay? The airways will collapse during respiration, and the patients use a large amount of energy just to exhale. Okay. Because the air is retained in the lungs, the oxygen exchange is very efficient. More time will spend in there. And there is overinflammation of the lungs that will lead to be permanently expanded. I want you to pay attention to the next video that explains a little more about COPD. Okay. The URL of the video, if you want to watch it again more carefully, or if some parts are not very clear, the URL is at the bottom of the slide.
COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, is a progressive disease that makes it hard to breathe. Progressive means the disease gets worse over time. When you breathe, the air goes down your windpipe into tubes in your lungs called bronchial tubes or airways. The airways branch into thousands of smaller, thinner tubes called bronchioles, which end in bunches of tiny round air sacs called alveoli. These air sacs are where intake of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide happens, which is called gas exchange. In healthy lungs, the airways and air sacs are elastic. They bounce back to their original shape after being stretched or filled with air. This elastic quality helps retain the normal structure of the lung and helps move the air quickly in and out. When you breathe in, each air sac fills up with air like a small balloon. When you breathe out, the air sacs deflate and the air goes out. In people who have COPD, less air flows in and out of the lungs because of damage to the airways and air sacs. The airways and air sacs may lose their elastic quality, and the walls between many of the air sacs may be destroyed. The airways also may become swollen or thicker than normal, and they may make more mucus than usual, which can clog them. COPD develops slowly and is usually diagnosed in middle-aged or older adults. The disease prevents proper airflow in and out of your lungs and can hinder gas exchange in the air sacs. COPD can cause coughing that produces large amounts of mucus, wheezing, shortness of breath, chest tightness, and other symptoms. COPD has no cure yet, and it is uncertain whether damage to the airways and lungs can be reversed. The good news is that early diagnosis, proper treatments, and lifestyle changes can help you stay more active, slow the progress of the disease, and ultimately improve your quality of life. For more information, go to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute website at www.nhlbi.nih.gov.
Okay, so again, what was the main factor for developing COPD? The main risk factor?
I feel like
It's a habit, a nasty habit, but smoking. Okay? So that is the main risk factor for developing COPD. Okay, any more questions, comments?
Yes.
Yes.
You said air in COPD.
Yes.
Air is retained in the lungs and that oxygen exchange is very efficient.
Yes.
But I think oxygen concentration gets
Will start.
low and oxygen exchange will be inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
So, why, efficient?
That's a good question. I was thinking the same what I was saying. I prepared this slide last year. And for sure this is correct, but I will check again and I'll bring you the answer next class if it's okay. Yeah. Yes, I will check the exact reasoning
Thank
for
you.
next class. Okay. Any more other comment? No? Okay, so next class we have. Who's presenting next class? No one? If you don't remember, then no one is presenting. Today is 19, right? Okay, so next time we have a guest speaker. It's going to be urinary system. So we don't have any presentation. And I think the last two of you have July 3rd, correct? Yes? You're aware, right? Who is doing anatomy of the digestive system? Who is doing anatomy of digestive system? It's individual work. So one of you has to do anatomy and the other one has to do functions. Okay? You look very confused, so I'm very worried. Maybe can you help them out? They have to make presentation for July 3rd. You know, right? You know. July 3rd, presentation. Yes? Can I ask you a favor? Can you make sure if they know they have to make presentation on July 3rd? Can you ask them in Japanese?
前なんか誰がどれやるみたいな紙って書いた覚えはあります？
ああ、あります。
あります。
大丈夫です。
大丈夫？本当大丈夫ですか？いや、ちょっと。Yeah, that's why I'm worried. If you know what you have to do or not. Who is doing anatomy and who is doing physiology? You both are doing digestive system. Correct? Me. Who is doing anatomy? You are doing anatomy? So, Kaori-san, Kaori Suzuki-san, you are doing anatomy. And Yoshiki Okamoto-san, you are doing functions. You're doing physiology. Correct? They're very lost, I think. July 3rd, anatomy of the digestive system, you will do it. And you will do functions of the digestive system. Correct? 30 minutes, 30 minutes. 30 percent. It's personal work. So it's not only, it's not 15 minutes, 15 minutes.
Not 20 minutes?
Hmm?
Not 20 minutes?
Well, 30 or 20, whatever it takes, but it's individual work.
Yes.
30 because maybe they can speak slower. Okay. You have this page too, right? So you're doing anatomy. You have to talk about location, structure, and so on. You're doing function. So you have to talk about process, activity. Okay? And you both have to send me your presentation. Okay? This email by 11 a.m. Okay? It could be 23 minutes. Yes? Yeah? Please. You can bring, like Suzuki-san, your memo. Okay, you can bring memo. But you cannot read entirely from your memo. Okay. The point is that you prepare, you study, and you tell everybody what you study. Otherwise, it's an essay and just reading an essay. Okay? So you can prepare memo, but you have to read, engage from time to time. Okay? I'm very worried about Ken. Okamoto-san, 大丈夫かな? Okay, then the other thing is, are you having troubles studying for the final exam? We only have one more quiz left. So what I'm thinking is, after the last quiz, I will give you a pool of questions to give you an idea of how to focus, what kind of things you can focus on when you need to study. Okay? Is that helpful? Yes? Okay, but that will be for the last quiz. Okay, not before. So you have to continue studying, reviewing. Anything else? No. So let's go home early. Thank you very much. Thank you.